I glanced down at my smartwatch during a quiet moment in the cafeteria kitchen, and my entire body went cold. A notification was glowing on the tiny screen, impossible to ignore. Papa sad, come home. 4-year-old Theo had somehow figured out how to use the connected tablet linked to my watch account, scrolled through my saved contacts, and sent that message directly to Grayson Hale, the new CEO of Halden Tech, a man I had actually spoken to exactly one time in my entire life. I worked as the head chef down in the company cafeteria, tucked away on the basement level where executives rarely wandered unless summoned for some catering event. Grayson had visited that space only once, 3 weeks earlier, when he came down personally to taste test a new seasonal menu item and complimented my roasted vegetable soup with a quiet sincerity that stayed lodged in my memory far longer than it probably should have. I never imagined he had kept my personal number after that brief introduction. I certainly never imagined he would use it. But 40 minutes after that notification appeared, my apartment intercom buzzed downstairs with an unfamiliar, insistent tone that made my stomach twist with sudden nervous anticipation. I stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the intercom panel near my front door, my mind racing through every possible explanation. Maybe it was a confused delivery driver. Maybe it was my nosy downstairs neighbor complaining again. But some deep instinct told me otherwise, and when I pressed the button and heard that deep, controlled voice announce himself, my stomach dropped straight through the floor. It's Grayson Hale. Your son texted me something concerning. I nearly dropped my phone. This could not be happening. I buzzed him up with trembling fingers, smoothing down my rumpled work shirt, wishing desperately I'd had more time to prepare myself for whatever this was becoming. When I opened my apartment door, there he stood in the dim hallway lighting, and the sight of him nearly knocked the breath directly out of my lungs. Grayson Hale looked nothing like the composed executive I'd briefly glimpsed weeks earlier in our cafeteria. He'd shed his suit jacket somewhere along his rushed journey, his white dress shirt wrinkled, sleeves rolled to his forearms. In one hand he carried 2 heavy grocery bags, and in the other, comically out of place against his sharp features, a small plush fox with oversized floppy ears. His deep blue eyes swept across my face, taking in whatever signs of exhaustion I'd been carrying for weeks without anyone noticing. Your son messaged me directly, he said again, softer this time. He mentioned you were sad. I wanted to make sure you were both okay. I stood frozen, mortified and confused, unable to form a coherent response. How had my son gotten this man's number stored in my contacts? Had I saved it myself after that cafeteria meeting without realizing its significance? Mr. Hale, I am so sorry about this, I finally stammered, my voice shaking with embarrassment. This is completely inappropriate. Theo must have gotten into my devices without my knowledge. You really did not need to travel all this way. Before I could say more, a small excited blur shot past my legs and launched himself at Grayson's expensive pants with complete abandon. You actually came, Theo shrieked with delight, wrapping his arms tightly around the CEO's knees like they were already old friends. I watched in stunned silence as Grayson set down the bags, crouched to Theo's eye level with surprising ease, and handed him the plush fox. Of course I came, buddy, he said warmly, his demeanor transforming into something gentle that I never would have associated with the ruthless reputation preceding him since his sudden promotion. Something shifted painfully deep within my chest watching this powerful stranger interact so naturally with my young son. Please come inside, I finally said after a hesitant pause, stepping back to allow him entry, though every rational part of my brain screamed that this situation was deeply strange and possibly career-ending. Grayson picked the bags back up and walked past me into my small, cluttered living room, glancing around with an unreadable expression, not judgment exactly, but something closer to genuine curiosity. My apartment was undeniably modest, nothing like whatever penthouse he probably called home. Scattered toys covered the worn carpet. A stack of unpaid bills sat on my counter where I'd been avoiding them for a week, and the space smelled faintly of leftover pasta sauce from dinner. You really did not have to bring anything, I said awkwardly, watching him set the bags down. He shrugged, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since arriving. I wanted to. Theo mentioned you were sad. I figured some good food might help, even just a little. I peered into the bags and felt my throat tighten with sudden emotion. He had brought thoughtful groceries, carefully considered rather than generic. Fresh vegetables, quality meat, ingredients I recognized from professional kitchens but rarely purchased on my tight single-parent budget. There was even a container of that premium tea brand I'd been meaning to buy but never justified. How did you know exactly what to get? I asked, bewildered. Grayson's cheeks colored slightly, an unexpected vulnerability crossing his composed features. I asked one of your coworkers what you liked. I hope that isn't too strange. It absolutely was strange that a corporate CEO had interrogated my colleagues about my grocery preferences before showing up with a stuffed animal for my son. But instead of feeling violated, I felt something warm unfurling slowly within my chest that I had not experienced in a very long time. Theo tugged insistently at Grayson's pant leg, holding up his brand new fox toy. His name is Rusty, my son announced with unwavering authority, as though this naming fact had been established weeks earlier. Grayson knelt back down immediately, examining the small stuffed fox with exaggerated theatrical seriousness that made my heart squeeze unexpectedly. Rusty is truly an excellent and distinguished name for such a fine creature. Theo giggled happily, that particular high-pitched joyful sound that always made my heart squeeze tightly with overwhelming love, and grabbed Grayson's hand to pull him purposefully toward the small collection of colorful building blocks scattered near our modest coffee table. I watched, still processing the surreal nature of this entire evening, as Grayson allowed himself to be willingly led across my living room floor and settled down cross-legged among my son's scattered toys without a single complaint about his expensive pants or the questionable state of my worn carpet. You really do not need to stay any longer, I offered weakly, though secretly I hoped he would ignore my half-hearted protest. Grayson looked up at me from the floor, Theo already constructing an elaborate tower beside him. Do you actually want me to leave right now? The question hung heavily in the air, loaded with far more meaning than its simple phrasing suggested. I thought about my exhausting week, about the crushing weight of single parenthood I had carried alone since my husband's accident 2 years ago, about how nice it felt having another adult present, even temporarily, even under such bizarre circumstances. No, I admitted quietly, surprising myself with my own honesty. I do not want you to leave tonight. Something flickered across his expression, perhaps relief, or something deeper I wasn't ready to name yet. Then I will stay, he said simply, turning his attention back to Theo's tower. And as I stood there watching this powerful, mysterious man patiently building blocks with my son on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday evening, I understood with sudden clarity that my carefully controlled world had just been irrevocably changed by 2 accidental words my son never meant to send. Grayson stayed for dinner that night, insisting on helping me prepare the ingredients he'd brought while Theo narrated an elaborate story about dinosaurs from his seat at the kitchen table. I found myself relaxing incrementally with each passing minute, the initial shock of his presence giving way to something more comfortable and natural than I'd expected from a man I barely knew. You cook professionally, right? Grayson asked, watching me chop vegetables with practiced efficiency. Head chef at the cafeteria, I confirmed. Though I originally trained for something more upscale, life had other plans. He didn't push for details immediately, simply nodding and continuing to assist wherever I directed him, following my instructions with surprising competence for someone who probably employed a personal chef at home. Where did you train? He asked eventually, genuine curiosity coloring his tone. I told him about culinary school, about the dreams I'd once harbored of opening my own restaurant, about how those plans shifted dramatically after Theo was born and again after my husband Marcus died in a car accident when Theo was barely 2 years old. Grayson's hands stilled on the cutting board, his expression turning serious. I'm sorry, he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that suggested he understood loss in ways beyond polite condolences. That must have been incredibly difficult, raising Theo alone while grieving. I nodded, unexpected tears pricking at my eyes. Most people offered surface-level sympathy before quickly changing the subject, uncomfortable with the weight of my grief. But Grayson simply waited, giving me space to continue if I wanted, or remain silent if that felt safer. Some days are harder than others, I admitted. The cafeteria job pays the bills, mostly, but it's not what I imagined for myself professionally. Still, Theo needs stability more than I need my dream restaurant right now. Grayson studied me with an intensity that made me acutely aware of how close we were standing in my small kitchen, our shoulders nearly brushing as we worked side by side. We ate dinner at my small kitchen table, Theo positioned between us in his booster seat, chattering happily about his day at preschool while devouring the pasta we'd prepared together. It struck me how easily Grayson fit into this domestic scene, how naturally he engaged with my son's rambling stories about classroom hamsters and finger-painting disasters. This wasn't the cold, calculating businessman that office gossip had painted him as during the weeks since he'd taken over as CEO. "Can I ask you something?" Grayson said once Theo had excused himself to retrieve a specific toy he wanted to show off. I nodded, curious despite my lingering nervousness about this entire strange evening. "Why do you avoid me at work?" His question caught me completely off guard, and I felt heat rush to my cheeks. "I don't avoid you," I said unconvincingly. Grayson raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying my denial. "You take the service elevator whenever I'm near the main one. You've called in sick twice when I was scheduled to visit the cafeteria. I'm not imagining this, Riley." Hearing him use my first name sent an unexpected shiver through me. At work, I was simply the chef, or occasionally Mr. Foster, to executives who bothered learning names at all. "I just didn't want to bother someone as busy as you," I mumbled, focusing on my water glass rather than meeting his gaze. The truth was far more complicated than that simple excuse, but I wasn't ready to voice the real reason, that ever since our brief interaction weeks ago, I'd found myself thinking about him far more than appropriate for someone who barely knew him, that his rare, genuine smile had lodged itself somewhere in my memory and refused to leave. "You could never bother me," Grayson said, his voice dropping to something more intimate. "I've actually been hoping to run into you again since that first time in the cafeteria." My heart stuttered painfully in my chest. Before I could formulate any response to that startling admission, Theo returned triumphantly, clutching a slightly worn picture book about space exploration, demanding that Grayson read it to him immediately. And to my continued amazement, Grayson agreed without hesitation, settling onto my couch with my son curled against his side as he read through the story with appropriate dramatic voices for different characters. I watched from the kitchen doorway, drying dishes I'd already dried twice, unable to tear my attention away from this unexpected tableau. By the time Theo's eyes grew heavy and his protests about bedtime became increasingly half-hearted, it was nearly 9 o'clock, far later than I'd anticipated this impromptu visit lasting. "I should get him to bed," I said reluctantly, scooping my drowsy son into my arms. Grayson stood as well, brushing invisible wrinkles from his dress pants. "I should probably head out too. Thank you for letting me stay, Riley. Tonight meant more to me than you probably realize." I carried Theo to his room, tucking him beneath his dinosaur-covered blankets, while he mumbled something about Rusty the fox needing to sleep beside him. When I returned to the living room, Grayson was standing near the door, hesitating in a way that suggested he wanted to say something but wasn't quite sure how to phrase it. "Can I be honest with you about something?" he asked, and I nodded, bracing myself for whatever revelation might follow. "I've thought about you constantly since that day in the cafeteria. I know it's unusual, maybe even inappropriate given our professional dynamic, but I couldn't stop thinking about your kindness, your talent, the way you interact with everyone around you with such genuine warmth." My breath caught in my throat. This powerful, mysterious CEO was standing in my modest apartment, essentially confessing feelings I'd been too afraid to even acknowledge in myself. "Grayson, this is complicated," I said carefully, my mind racing through implications and consequences. "You're the CEO of the company I work for. There are power dynamics here that make this incredibly risky for both of us, but especially for me." He nodded, taking a step closer, close enough that I could smell the faint remnants of his cologne mixed with the pasta sauce we'd cooked together. "I know all of that, Riley. I've thought through every complication extensively. But when your son sent me that message tonight, I realized I was tired of overthinking this and denying myself the chance to know you better." His honesty disarmed me completely, stripping away my carefully constructed defenses. "I'm scared," I admitted quietly, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "Scared of what this could mean, scared of getting hurt again, scared of what it might mean for Theo if this doesn't work out." Grayson reached out slowly, giving me time to step back if I wanted, and gently squeezed my hand. "I understand that fear completely. I'm not asking you to have all the answers tonight. I'm just asking you not to close the door on this possibility entirely." Standing there in my quiet apartment, Theo sleeping peacefully down the hall, I found myself nodding slowly, unable to deny the pull I felt toward this unexpected, complicated man who had shown up in my life because of 2 accidental words. "One step at a time," I finally said, testing the words as I spoke them. "I can try that." Grayson's expression softened into something close to relief. "That's all I'm asking for, Riley. One step at a time, together." Before he left that night, he paused at the door one final time. "Thank you for trusting me tonight, even a little. It means everything." After he disappeared down the hallway, I stood there for a long moment, my heart racing with a mixture of terror and something that felt dangerously close to hope, unable to shake the feeling that my quiet, carefully controlled world had just tilted permanently on its axis. 2 days passed in a strange charged silence after Grayson's unexpected visit, both of us maintaining professional distance during work hours while something unspoken simmered beneath the surface whenever our paths crossed in the cafeteria hallways. I caught him watching me during his brief visits to grab coffee, his gaze lingering a beat too long before he'd quickly compose himself and return to his executive demeanor. My coworkers noticed too, whispering speculation whenever he lingered near the serving line longer than strictly necessary, and I felt my cheeks warm every single time. On the third day, my doorbell rang again, and this time I wasn't entirely surprised to find Grayson standing there, though the small art supply kit he carried caught me off guard. "I thought Theo might enjoy this," he said, almost shyly, holding out the colorful package. I remembered him mentioning he liked drawing dinosaurs during dinner. The fact that he'd retained such a small detail from our previous conversation sent warmth spreading through my chest, and I found myself stepping aside to let him in without a second thought. We spent that evening on my living room floor, all three of us surrounded by scattered crayons and construction paper, Theo directing an elaborate art project that somehow involved both Grayson and me creating our own dinosaur species according to his very specific 4-year-old specifications. I watched Grayson attempt to draw what Theo insisted was a friendly triceratops with genuine effort, his tongue poking slightly between his lips in concentration, and found myself laughing more freely than I had in months. This was a side of him I doubted many people ever witnessed, playful, patient, completely present in a moment that had nothing to do with corporate strategy or business acquisitions. "You're surprisingly good at this," I told him, examining his admittedly terrible but enthusiastic drawing attempt. Grayson grinned, an expression that transformed his entire face into something boyish and unguarded. "I have hidden talents, apparently." Once Theo became absorbed in adding elaborate details to his own creation, oblivious to the adults around him, Grayson shifted his attention to me with sudden seriousness. "Riley, I need to tell you something," he said, his tone shifting enough that I immediately set down my crayon, giving him my full attention. My heart began racing with anticipation and nervousness in equal measure. "Since that first day I saw you in the cafeteria, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Not just as an attractive person, though you certainly are that, but as someone whose kindness and dedication genuinely impressed me. Watching you with Theo tonight, seeing how much love and patience you have despite everything you're juggling alone, it's remarkable." I felt heat rush to my face, overwhelmed by the sincerity radiating from his words. "I don't know what to say," I admitted honestly. "This is all happening so fast, and I'm still processing whether this is even a good idea given our professional situation." Grayson reached across the small distance between us on my living room floor, his hand covering mine where it rested on the carpet. "I understand your hesitation completely. I've spent considerable time thinking through the complications myself. But I want to be transparent with you about my intentions, Riley. This isn't some passing curiosity or inappropriate workplace crush. I'm genuinely interested in getting to know you, in seeing where this connection between us might lead, if you're willing to explore it with me." His sincerity was almost overwhelming, especially considering how rarely anyone had expressed such direct, unguarded interest in me since Marcus passed away. I'd grown so accustomed to prioritizing everyone else's needs, particularly Theo's, that the idea of someone actively pursuing my own happiness felt almost foreign to me now. "I'm an employer's dream and a nightmare all wrapped together," I said with a nervous laugh, trying to lighten the intensity of the moment. "Single father, exhausted most days, definitely not the sophisticated partner someone in your position probably expects." "Stop that," Grayson said firmly, his grip on my hand tightening slightly. "Don't diminish yourself like that. You're an incredible father who has managed to build a stable, loving home for your son despite tremendous loss and difficulty. That's not something to apologize for. It's something to be proud of." His words struck something deep within me, addressing insecurities I'd carried silently for 2 years without fully acknowledging them even to myself. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" I asked, genuinely curious about this man who seemed to understand me despite our limited acquaintance. Grayson's expression softened further. "I pay attention. I've been paying attention to you for weeks, Riley. Probably longer than you'd find comfortable if you knew the extent of it. Theo suddenly interrupted our charged moment, proudly presenting his finished artwork, an elaborate, colorful creature that bore no resemblance to any actual dinosaur but represented hours of dedicated 4-year-old effort. "This is Sparkle," he announced grandly, holding up the paper for our inspection. "She's the queen of all dinosaurs." Grayson examined the artwork with appropriate seriousness. "Sparkle is magnificent, clearly the most powerful dinosaur in this entire collection." Theo beamed with pride, then unexpectedly climbed into Grayson's lap, settling comfortably as if this was completely natural, as if this powerful stranger had always belonged in our small family unit. I watched this scene unfold with a mixture of joy and terror, understanding that my son was becoming attached to someone whose place in our lives remained fundamentally uncertain. Later, after Theo had finally succumbed to exhaustion and I'd tucked him into bed with promises of more art projects tomorrow, I returned to find Grayson still sitting on my living room floor, gathering scattered art supplies with methodical care. "You don't have to clean up," I told him, though I appreciated the gesture more than I probably should have. He looked up at me, something vulnerable crossing his expression. "I want to be honest about something else, Riley. I know this situation is unconventional, that jumping into something with someone who has a child, who's still healing from significant loss, comes with complications I might not fully understand. But I'm not interested in a casual arrangement here. If we're going to explore this connection between us, I want you to know I'm serious about the possibility of something real, something lasting." His declaration hung in the air between us, weighted with implications neither of us had fully addressed yet. "I need time," I said honestly, though everything in me wanted to lean into the warmth he offered. Not because I don't feel something too, but because I need to be certain before Theo gets more attached than he already is. Grayson nodded, understanding evident in his expression. "Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere, Riley. I promise you that." He gathered his coat, pausing once more by the door. "For what it's worth, watching you tonight, laughing, relaxed, completely yourself, that's the version of you I hope gets to exist more often, regardless of what happens between us." His words settled somewhere deep and unguarded within me, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself in years. I walked him to the door, our hands brushing briefly as he stepped past me into the hallway, and neither of us pulled away immediately from that small point of contact. As he finally left that evening, I stood in my doorway watching him walk toward his waiting car, feeling something I hadn't experienced since before Marcus died. Genuine, terrifying hope for a future I hadn't dared imagine possible until 2 accidental words changed everything between us forever. The following week, Grayson formally asked me on an actual date, his nervousness evident in the careful way he phrased the invitation during a brief hallway encounter near the cafeteria service entrance. "I know we've spent time together already, but I'd like to take you somewhere properly, if you're comfortable with that," he said, shifting his weight slightly, a stark contrast to his usual confident executive demeanor. I'd arranged for my sister to watch Theo for the evening, my hands trembling slightly with anticipation as I dressed for what felt like my first real date in years. Grayson picked me up personally rather than sending a driver, dressed in a charcoal suit without his usual tie, looking simultaneously polished and approachable. "You look beautiful," he said as I climbed into his car, his gaze warm and appreciative without feeling invasive. He'd chosen a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the city skyline, the kind of place I would never have selected for myself given the obvious expense, but Grayson insisted this was exactly where he wanted to bring me. String lights hung overhead, casting a soft golden glow across our small table, and for a moment I let myself forget every practical worry weighing on my shoulders and simply exist in the beauty of this unlikely evening. We talked for hours over dinner, conversation flowing easily between us in ways that surprised me given how nervous I'd felt beforehand. He told me about his complicated relationship with his father, a demanding businessman who'd groomed Grayson for corporate leadership from childhood, while offering little emotional warmth along the way. "I think that's partly why I've been drawn to watching you with Theo," he admitted, swirling wine in his glass thoughtfully. "The way you parent with such patience and genuine affection, it's different from anything I experienced growing up." I shared more details about Marcus, about our relationship before his accident, about the guilt I sometimes felt for finding happiness again while still grieving him. "You don't have to feel guilty for wanting happiness," Grayson said gently, reaching across the table to take my hand. Marcus would want that for you and Theo, wouldn't he? His question struck something deep within me, addressing feelings I'd struggled to articulate even to myself. You're right, I admitted quietly. He would want us to be happy, to keep living fully rather than just surviving. The evening continued with easy conversation, laughter, and small moments of connection that felt increasingly natural despite the short time we'd actually known each other. Grayson asked thoughtful questions about my culinary aspirations, seeming genuinely interested in my abandoned dreams of restaurant ownership rather than simply making polite conversation. Have you ever considered pursuing that again? He asked. Not right now, obviously, with Theo so young, but eventually? I'd never actually discussed this with anyone since Marcus died, the dream feeling too painful and impractical to voice aloud. Sometimes I think about it, I confessed, but it feels selfish, focusing on my own ambitions when Theo needs stability so much right now. Grayson shook his head firmly. Pursuing your dreams isn't selfish, Riley. Showing Theo that you can build something meaningful for yourself while still being an incredible father. That's a valuable lesson too. His perspective offered something I hadn't considered, a reframing of guilt I'd carried silently for far too long. After dinner concluded, Grayson drove me home, and we sat in comfortable silence outside my apartment building, neither of us quite ready for the evening to end. I had an incredible time tonight, he said, turning to face me fully in the dim car interior. I did too, I admitted, surprised by how genuinely I meant those words. He walked me to my door, and standing there in the quiet hallway, something shifted between us, the accumulated tension of weeks finally reaching its natural culmination. Riley, I want to kiss you, Grayson said with characteristic directness, giving me space to decline if I wanted. Instead of responding verbally, I closed the remaining distance between us, initiating the kiss myself, needing to feel certain rather than passive in this decision. His lips were soft against mine, his hand coming up to gently cup my jaw as the kiss deepened. Years of loneliness and grief momentarily forgotten in this singular moment of connection. When we finally separated, both slightly breathless, Grayson rested his forehead against mine. I've wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted. What took you so long? I asked with a soft laugh, feeling lighter than I had in years. Fear of moving too fast, of scaring you away before you were ready, he answered honestly. You're not scaring me away, I promised, meaning every word. I'm done being afraid of this, of us. Grayson kissed me again, softer this time, more deliberate, sealing something between us that felt significant beyond just physical attraction. I want you to know something, he said seriously once we'd separated again. I'm not interested in keeping this casual or hidden indefinitely. I understand we need to navigate the workplace complications carefully, but eventually I want people to know how serious I am about you and Theo. His declaration filled me with a mixture of excitement and lingering nervousness about potential complications, but underneath those practical concerns, genuine happiness bloomed brighter than I'd allowed myself to feel in years. I want that too, I confirmed, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. When I finally went inside after saying goodnight, my sister greeted me with knowing eyes, clearly reading the happiness evident on my face despite my attempts at composure. That good, huh? She teased, gathering her belongings to head home. I simply smiled, unable to fully articulate the magnitude of what had shifted within me that evening. After she left, I checked on sleeping Theo, brushing his hair back gently and feeling overwhelming gratitude for this unexpected turn my life had taken. My phone buzzed with a message from Grayson as I settled into bed myself. Already looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Tonight meant everything to me. I fell asleep with a smile on my face, allowing myself to feel genuine hope for the first time since Marcus's accident had shattered my carefully constructed world 2 years earlier. Whatever complications lay ahead, whatever risks this relationship carried given our professional dynamic, I found myself willing to navigate them for the possibility of the happiness Grayson represented, for the gentle way he'd woven himself into both my life and Theo's without ever making either of us feel like burdens rather than blessings worth pursuing. I thought about how differently this all could have unfolded, how a stranger of his position could have simply ignored an accidental text message from a child, could have dismissed the entire situation as awkward and beneath his attention. Instead, he had shown up, had kept showing up, had proven through consistent small actions that his interest ran deeper than curiosity or convenience. That kind of steady reliability felt foreign after years of managing everything alone. and I found myself cautiously allowing hope to take root where fear had lived for so long. The following morning, I woke early to prepare breakfast before Theo stirred, humming quietly to myself, feeling lighter than I had in longer than I could remember. Even the mundane routine of scrambling eggs felt different now, colored by the memory of Grayson's kiss and the promise of tomorrow waiting just beyond the horizon of this ordinary, transformed morning. By the time Theo padded into the kitchen rubbing sleep from his eyes, I found myself already smiling, already looking forward to whatever unexpected chapter this new happiness might write next for the both of us. 3 weeks into our relationship, everything had been settling into a comfortable rhythm neither of us had quite dared to name out loud yet, when disaster struck without warning during what had been an entirely ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I received a frantic call from Theo's preschool informing me that he'd had a severe allergic reaction to something served during snack time, his face swelling rapidly, breathing becoming labored. Pure terror consumed me as I raced from the cafeteria kitchen, barely remembering to remove my apron before sprinting toward my car. My hands shook so violently I could barely manage to call emergency services while simultaneously trying to reach the preschool for updates. By the time I arrived, paramedics were already administering treatment, Theo's small body seeming impossibly fragile as they worked to stabilize him before transport to the hospital. I climbed into the ambulance alongside him, completely unable to think clearly beyond overwhelming fear for my son's safety. At the hospital, everything became a blur of medical terminology, waiting rooms, and crushing anxiety as doctors worked to determine the severity of Theo's reaction and appropriate treatment protocols. I called Grayson with trembling hands, barely able to form coherent sentences through my panic. Theo, allergic reaction, hospital. I managed between sobs, unable to organize my thoughts into anything more articulate. Grayson's response was immediate and steady despite my incoherent explanation. I'm coming right now. Which hospital? Within 20 minutes, faster than should have been possible given his office location downtown, Grayson appeared in the emergency room waiting area, still dressed in his business suit but with an expression of pure concern that eliminated any pretense of professional composure. He immediately pulled me into his arms, allowing me to finally release the sobs I'd been suppressing since receiving that initial terrifying phone call. He's going to be okay, Grayson murmured against my hair, his own voice slightly unsteady despite his attempts at reassurance. The doctors are taking excellent care of him. We sat together in uncomfortable plastic chairs through what felt like endless hours of waiting, Grayson never releasing my hand, occasionally disappearing briefly to bring me water or coffee I couldn't actually drink given my anxiety. He canceled meetings without hesitation, remained present through every update from medical staff, held me steady when fear threatened to overwhelm my capacity for rational thought. When a doctor finally emerged to inform us that Theo had stabilized, that his allergic reaction had been severe but successfully treated, that he would need to remain overnight for observation but would ultimately be completely fine, I collapsed against Grayson's chest, overwhelming relief mixing with lingering terror in an emotional wave I couldn't control. Thank you for coming, I whispered once we were finally permitted to see Theo, who lay small and slightly groggy in his hospital bed but very much alive and recovering. Grayson squeezed my shoulder gently. There's nowhere else I would have wanted to be, Riley. You and Theo matter more to me than any business meeting or corporate obligation. His words, spoken with such simple conviction, settled something deep within my anxious heart. We spent the night in Theo's hospital room, Grayson insisting on staying despite my protests that he should return home and rest properly. He curled uncomfortably in a chair beside the bed, occasionally dozing but always alert whenever Theo stirred or nurses entered to check vital signs. Watching him maintain this vigil throughout the night, prioritizing my son's comfort and my own emotional stability over his own physical comfort, solidified something within me that I'd been hesitant to fully acknowledge until this crisis forced clarity. By morning, Theo was cleared for discharge, energetic enough to demand pancakes despite the medical scare from the previous day. As we walked through the hospital parking garage toward Grayson's car, Theo held both our hands, swinging between us with the resilient joy only children seem capable of after traumatic experiences. Once we'd settled Theo into his car seat, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the past 24 hours, Grayson turned to me with an expression of quiet intensity. Riley, I need to tell you something, he said, his voice carrying weight beyond simple conversation. Watching you last night, seeing how completely you love Theo, how fiercely you fight for his well-being, I realized something important about my own feelings for you. My breath caught, anticipation and vulnerability warring within me. I'm in love with you, Grayson continued, his blue eyes steady despite the raw honesty of his declaration. Not just attracted to you, not just enjoying our time together, but genuinely, completely in love with both you and Theo. I want to build a real future with you both, if you'll have me. Tears immediately filled my eyes, overwhelming emotion from the exhausting hospital experience combining with the profound significance of his words. I love you too, I admitted, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating as they left my lips. I've been afraid to say it, afraid this might be too fast, but watching you last night, seeing how you showed up for us without hesitation, I know this is real. Grayson pulled me into a gentle embrace, careful of our exhaustion but conveying deep tenderness despite the physical fatigue we both carried. We're going to be okay, he murmured, all three of us, together. Driving home that morning, sunlight streaming through the windshield after our sleepless night, I watched Grayson's profile as he navigated traffic with careful attention, occasionally glancing back to check on Theo through the rearview mirror. This man, who had entered our lives through pure accident, through my son's innocent text message weeks earlier, had proven himself repeatedly through actions rather than empty promises. He'd shown up during crisis, maintained patience through complicated circumstances, and now offered love without reservation despite the complications our relationship would inevitably continue facing. Once we arrived home and settled Theo comfortably on the couch with cartoons and promised pancakes, Grayson pulled me aside briefly in the kitchen. I meant what I said, he reiterated softly. This isn't just relief talking after a scary night. I've felt this way for weeks now, watching you both, falling deeper into wanting a life with you. I believed him completely, understanding finally that whatever fears I'd carried about vulnerability and loss were being gently, persistently dismantled by someone who chose us consistently, who demonstrated through repeated actions that his commitment ran far deeper than convenient words. As I prepared pancakes for my recovering son, Grayson beside me assisting with batter mixing, I allowed myself to fully embrace the unexpected happiness that had found us through circumstances neither of us could have predicted just months earlier. Theo, still slightly pale but back to his energetic self, sat at the counter narrating an elaborate story about his hospital adventure to anyone who would listen, transforming what had been a terrifying ordeal into something almost heroic in his young imagination. Watching Grayson laugh genuinely at my son's exaggerated storytelling, flour dusting his forearms, I understood that this quiet domestic morning represented everything I'd once believed I might never have again after losing Marcus, a partner who showed up fully, who chose us not out of obligation but genuine desire, who made our small, complicated family feel whole rather than lacking. The fear that had gripped me for 2 years began loosening its hold, replaced slowly by something resembling trust in a future I could finally allow myself to imagine. A future that included this steady, unexpected man who had walked into our lives through nothing more than a child's accidental message and had simply refused to walk back out again. In the weeks following that emotional hospital experience, Grayson and I made the decision to officially acknowledge our relationship, both at work and within our expanding circle of family and friends. We scheduled a meeting with human resources together, Grayson insisting on complete transparency to avoid any appearance of impropriety given his position as CEO. The process involved documentation, discussions about appropriate boundaries, and reassignment of my direct reporting structure to eliminate any direct conflict of interest concerns. Predictably, office gossip intensified once our relationship became known throughout the company. I overheard whispered comments in break rooms, noticed sideways glances during meetings, occasionally caught fragments of conversations suggesting I'd somehow manipulated my way into favor through inappropriate means. The scrutiny felt exhausting, threatening to overshadow the genuine happiness I'd found with Grayson. During one particularly difficult afternoon, a senior manager made a pointed comment during a staff meeting about certain employees receiving special treatment lately, clearly directing the remark toward recent scheduling accommodations I'd received to manage Theo's ongoing medical follow-up appointments. Grayson, present for this particular meeting, addressed the comment immediately with characteristic directness. Riley's schedule accommodations were approved through standard HR procedures following his son's medical emergency, the same accommodations any employee would receive under similar circumstances. If anyone has concerns about company policy implementation, my office remains open for discussion. His firm defense, delivered without acknowledging our personal relationship directly, still conveyed clear protection while maintaining professional boundaries. Later that evening, I confronted him gently about the incident. You didn't have to defend me so publicly. It probably just fuels more speculation about favoritism. Grayson's expression remained resolute. I won't stand silently while people question your professional accommodations, especially accommodations that have nothing to do with our personal relationship and everything to do with basic workplace decency. Meanwhile, our domestic life continued evolving naturally, Grayson spending increasingly frequent nights at my apartment, his belongings gradually integrating into our small space. His expensive watches sat beside my worn kitchen items, his business books stacked near Theo's picture book collection, creating an unexpected but harmonious blend of our previously separate worlds. Theo had begun referring to him simply as Gray, the nickname feeling natural and affectionate rather than formal, a clear indication of how thoroughly Grayson had become woven into our small family unit. One particular Sunday morning, we found ourselves attempting to make waffles together, flour dusting nearly every surface as Theo insisted on helping by adding excessive amounts of chocolate chips to the batter. "Gray, are you gonna live here forever?" Theo asked suddenly between mouthfuls of waffle batter he'd been sneaking directly from the bowl. Grayson exchanged a meaningful glance with me before crouching to Theo's level, his expression softening with obvious affection. "Would you like that, buddy?" Theo nodded enthusiastically, waffle batter smeared across his cheek. "Yeah, you make Papa happy, and you're really good at building block towers." Grayson laughed, genuine warmth radiating from his entire demeanor. "Then I think that sounds like a wonderful plan." My throat tightened watching this exchange, understanding the profound significance behind this seemingly casual morning conversation. Later, once Theo had settled into his weekend cartoon routine, sufficiently distracted, Grayson pulled me aside with obvious intentionality. "I've been thinking seriously about what Theo asked this morning," he began, taking both my hands in his. "I want to make this official, Riley. I want to move in permanently, to build a real life together rather than continuing this transitional arrangement we've maintained." I felt my heart racing with excitement mixed with lingering practical concerns. "Are you certain about this? Taking on instant parenthood, merging our completely different lifestyles, navigating whatever complications continue arising from workplace dynamics?" Grayson squeezed my hands reassuringly. "I've never been more certain about anything. Riley, you and Theo have given my life purpose and meaning I never experienced before meeting you both. I'm not interested in maintaining separate spaces or treating this relationship as temporary. I want permanence, commitment, a genuine family built together." His words, spoken with such unwavering conviction, dissolved any remaining hesitation I'd been harboring. "I want that too," I confirmed, feeling tears gathering despite my happiness. "I want you here permanently, as part of our family officially, not just occasionally staying over." That evening, after Theo had finally succumbed to sleep following an exhausting day of waffle-making adventures, Grayson and I stood together on my small apartment balcony, watching city lights illuminate the darkening sky below us. His arms wrapped protectively around my waist from behind, my back resting against his solid warmth as we contemplated the unlikely journey that had brought us together. "Do you ever think about how strange this all started?" I asked, tilting my head back against his shoulder. A random text message from a 4-year-old completely changing both our trajectories. Grayson chuckled softly, the sound rumbling pleasantly through his chest against my back. "I think about it constantly, actually. I'm endlessly grateful Theo sent that message. Otherwise, I might have spent months, maybe years, working up courage to approach you properly." I turned within his embrace to face him directly, studying his features illuminated by soft moonlight mixed with warm glow from our apartment windows behind us. "I'm grateful too," I admitted honestly. "For all of this, for you choosing us despite every complication that could have made this impossible." Grayson leaned down, pressing a tender kiss against my forehead before speaking again. "We're not just choosing each other despite complications, Riley. We're choosing each other because of everything we've built together. Resilience, honesty, genuine partnership. That's worth every complication we've navigated and every one we'll face moving forward." His declaration, delivered with such quiet certainty, settled peacefully within my heart. For the first time since Marcus's death had shattered my carefully constructed world, I felt genuine, unshakable hope for our future, Theo's, mine, and now Grayson's. woven together into something resembling the family I'd feared I might never rebuild after tragedy first tore mine apart. In the weeks that followed, Grayson officially moved his belongings into our apartment, and eventually we found a slightly larger home together, one with a small backyard where Theo could play and enough space for the family we were steadily building. Office gossip eventually faded as colleagues witnessed the genuine partnership we maintained, professional and respectful even as our personal commitment deepened daily. Theo thrived under the steady presence of two parents who adored him completely. His early trauma from losing his father slowly softened by the security Grayson provided without ever attempting to replace the memory of Marcus, choosing instead to build something entirely his own alongside us. On quiet evenings, watching Grayson help Theo with homework or hearing them laugh together over some ridiculous joke only the two of them seemed to understand, I recognized with quiet certainty that everything I'd once believed impossible had become simply, beautifully, our ordinary life together. Sometimes late at night, after Theo had gone to bed and the house settled into comfortable silence, Grayson would pull me close on the couch and remind me softly that none of this had been an accident. Not really, that some part of him had been searching for exactly this kind of belonging long before he ever understood what he was looking for. I would think back often to that first terrifying night, to the notification glowing on my watch, to the stranger who showed up at my door carrying groceries and a small stuffed fox, and I would marvel at how completely two accidental words from my son had rewritten the entire trajectory of our small, resilient family, transforming loss into unexpected grace and loneliness into a home neither of us had dared imagine we would ever find again.